Friends, welcome. A short talk about how I imagine the future need not be quite so bad as many of us fear. For centuries now, campaigners and politicians have been fighting for democracy, to democratise society and institutions, to extend democratic rights, to develop citizenship and so forth. There's still a huge place for all that in today's world, but I would maintain that systems labelled democratic, never mind about the accuracy or otherwise of the label at this stage, are now sufficiently widespread, and also that arguments against democracy are sufficiently unfamiliar, that it's time to look at how democracy's capacity to handle the most difficult questions and conflicts might be stretched. For instance, the Western powers' handling of so-called Islamism and all that goes with that is downright incoherent and confused. We should not wonder at that, since Western society and culture is itself incoherent and confused at a very deep level. Even the concept of interest is uncertain and riddled with conflicts. Does that mean security at home, or cheap oil, or diplomatic alliances with who or against who, or jobs in domestic industry, or curbing immigration, or encouraging democracy, or what? A most cursory look at diverse currents of opinion within the West on environmental issues, multiculturalism and ethnicity, religion in politics, the arms trade and motoring, the security state and civil liberties, and reportage of these and manifold other issues is sufficient to show that a clear and coherent understanding of Western interests in other parts of the world or at home simply does not exist. Indeed, the very notions of so-called realism in international affairs, normally interpreted as states pursuing their own interests with those assumed to have a clear definition, and ethical policy, vaguely understood as applying universal moral norms in international affairs on the assumption that these are, or at least should be, universally accepted, are themselves highly contentious. It's hardly strange to point out that the arguments and divergences involved here are ethical or moral arguments as those terms are normally understood, and that such arguments reach deep into the cultural life and indeed the spiritual being of vast numbers of people. At the same time, there are obviously political arguments, again as that term is normally understood. It's that sort of observation which leads me to argue that democracy, not least within the West, needs to either settle these issues in accordance with democratic practice or accept that they cannot be settled, therefore Western interest, never mind Western culture or whatever, is a chimera. But I cannot see how, if the former approach is to be possible, the conclusion can be avoided that both the questions of moral value and politics would be settled by our free choices, and that whatever is then decided will be temporal in the sense of being open to challenge, and therefore change if a challenge is successful at some future time. That is to say, we would not be treating our moral values, including those involved in international affairs, as eternal truths, not subject to limits of time, and therefore not subject to change or alteration at any future time. Some commentators, such as Levert and de Sand, 2014, have noted that democracy does not depend on any unalterable founding principles. But that means that time is of the essence for democracy. Even constitutional or liberal democracy insists that the ground rules can be changed, perhaps for special procedures, as well as setting time limits for terms of office, so that it remains open for opposing arguments, positions and claims to be staked out and put across to the people at a future time. Retaining the status quo has to remain itself subject to the democratic decision. I'm aware that a century or more ago the Catholic Church understood the above points as an argument against democracy, since, naturally from their point of view, They held that certain ethical truths are inalienable in metaphysical terms. Indeed, they've not abandoned that position even since the Church accepted democracy and became an active supporter of democracy in many parts of the world. However, I have no intention of taking the temporality of democracy as an argument against it, for two basic reasons. One, history, from the misfortunes of Plato and Syracuse to present time, has not been kind to the notion that a trained elite of experts can be relied on for wisdom and wise leadership. The case for meritocracy, with competitive tests of merit, is strong with regard to specialised functions suited to many areas of employment. But failures of leadership in business or politics, whether they be episodes of corruption, simple lack of vision, failure to avoid war and persecution, or whatever else, are and always have been too commonplace to support the idea that the more holistic qualities required for overall direction can be reliably produced by specialised elites, be they hereditary with training from childhood or selected by some competitive process. In that sense, I would suggest history endorses Montaigne against Plato in the argument about whether ordinary uneducated people can be wise. I will say a little more about the meaning of wise shortly, but whether wisdom is a skill in which experts can be trained. Indeed, for all that Michel de Montaigne was a 16th century French aristocrat who moved in court circles, his position on wisdom carries an egalitarian and democratic implication. But thus far the argument is essentially negative. There's no reason to suppose more than a limited number of people are wise, even in their personal lives, let alone capable of deep understanding of the wider world. It's the negative in regard to the various forms of elitism which makes a case for democracy and equality here, rather than the ideas of folk wisdom which have a dubious past of their own. Possibly a contemporary argument for democracy has to remain negative in philosophical terms, but amongst the challenges facing the 21st century, and Western societies in particular, is the sheer difficulty, or perhaps impossibility, of resolving moral and therefore political confusion and incoherence by any means other than raw democratic choices. The current trend of neoliberalism, basically leaving all choices to markets, is fed by the failure of tradition, religious or secular, and history to cater for values which cannot be monetised, as well as their failure to prevent such values becoming destructive. We are left with allocating social value according to markets, supported by the ways in which traditional values, especially patriotism, act as a driver for economic growth and therefore change. I would maintain that markets are much too limited in their ability to deal with values that cannot be monetised, including the most basic values such as conscious existence itself, to provide a solution to the incoherence. In some ways they exacerbate it by throwing up new tensions through their own operation, not least as regards inequality and resource allocation. In current international affairs, markets are more likely to complicate the issues further than resolve them. Now, none of this provides an alternative to political democracy as the way to even keep the incoherence manageable, let alone settle the underlying moral judgments. Perhaps sadly, human experience in this form is not supporting the claim of moral realism, that group of theories which has it that moral claims, such as those embedded in all the varied positions on international affairs hinted at earlier, can be true or false in some meaningful sense. I propose instead to take the logic of the matter back a stage and say that truth and wisdom are both meta-standards or presences which stand prior, logically speaking, to moral and other claims. However, they play different roles in judgment of claims. Truth and true apply to judgments about information and representation of that information, whereas wisdom and wise apply rather to judgments about what to do with the information. The sheer difficulty of moving beyond rival moral claims to actually making some kind of judgment between them indicates that at the very least it's more helpful to see morality or ethics and moral judgment as sitting in the realm of judgments about what to do with information than judgments about information, such as its accuracy or otherwise in itself. In any case, wisdom requires prior truth judgments as to the reliability of information and information sources, and on different levels, such as the possibility of sheer error or of deliberate misrepresentation. But the two forms of judgment remain distinct, and the proper place of any accompanying moral judgment is of fundamental importance. It's worth noting here that even if I'm correct in placing moral and political judgment within the realm of applying information already obtained, the decision on correct information as a prior requirement, so that it may not make sense to speak of a moral mistake in a simple sense, it remains clearly possible to make a moral judgment and to speak of having done doing so. In my argument is that moral misjudgment is closer in nature to the negation of wisdom, which is folly or stupidity, than to the negation of truth, which is falsehood. In conclusion, I'm in no way trying to suggest that democracy has any special talent for wisdom or wise judgment. Rather, I'm suggesting two things. First, that we need to confirm abandonment of the anti-democratic dream of a wise elite of experts or aristocrats who can or will solve our deepest problems for us. Second, that democracy is being confronted with challenges and decisions that will in fact require the kind of qualities we call wisdom. Whether it will rise to the challenge is quite another question. There I rest my case.